It's pretty wild when you hear a passage from the Bible being used to back up a modern political system. And believe me, it happens a lot. One of the biggest examples, one that sparks a ton of debate, is a little section in the book of Acts. Some people look at it and see a clear blueprint for socialism or even communism. So let's actually dive in and see what's really going on here.
This is the big question, right? Did the very first followers of Jesus live in this kind of commune, sharing everything, in a way that looks like some of these modern political ideas? It's a really bold claim, so we're going to break it down piece by piece. And there it is. This is the text at the absolute center of this whole conversation. I mean, reading it, you can totally see why people make the connection. When you hear phrases like had all things in common and giving to people as any had need, your brain might immediately jump to certain political slogans. But is that really the whole story?
Okay, to really get to the bottom of this, we've got to be clear about what we're comparing. Let's put the model we see in Acts right up against the blueprint for socialism and see how they stack up.
So first things first, what are we even talking about when we say socialism? Well, the source material defines it as an economic system where resources are publicly owned. The key thing is that the production and distribution of wealth are controlled by a government or some collective body. So think public ownership and top-down control. Got it? Okay, let's hold that thought.
Wow, okay. When you lay it out like this, the differences are just stark. Look at the community in Acts. There was no government forcing them to do anything. The apostles were there for guidance, but they weren't the state. And participation? It was totally voluntary. It was a choice people made from the heart, not because it was the law. But here's the real kicker. Private property was still a thing. People chose to sell their own stuff. That personal free choice is the complete opposite of a coercive, state-mandated system where private property is abolished. They're just fundamentally different. So right away, we see a huge disconnect. But that's just looking at those few verses. What happens when we zoom out and look at the rest of the New Testament? Let's check out the bigger picture.
When you start looking around, the idea that this was some kind of required economic model for all Christians just falls apart. For starters, this whole selling everything and sharing thing, it was pretty much unique to the church in Jerusalem. You don't see it being taught as a rule for the other churches that were started. And get this, it didn't create some perfect, wealthy utopia. In fact, the Jerusalem church was known for being really poor. So poor that other churches were constantly taking up collections to help them out. That suggests the goal here wasn't a new economy. It was about creating radical unity in a specific community during a specific time of need.
And now we get to what the source material presents as maybe the most powerful argument against this whole idea. The ultimate reason you just can't neatly map Christian faith onto a single earthly political system. Yep, this one doesn't come from interpreting what the apostles did. This goes straight to the source, to the words Jesus himself spoke way before any of this happened in Acts. And there it is. My kingdom is not of this world. The source argues this one sentence changes everything. It creates a fundamental separation between the Christian faith and any political or economic system on earth. The goals of God's kingdom are spiritual, things like redemption, righteousness, love. The goals of a state are, well, earthly. The argument is that trying to merge the church with any single system, whether that's socialism or capitalism or anything else, is to just completely miss this core point. And you see this idea backed up in other places too. I mean, think about it. The Bible has laws against stealing. That only makes sense if people are actually allowed to own their own property in the first place, right? The text never says earning money or owning a business is wrong. What it condemns again and again is injustice, greed, and the abuse of power. And let's be honest, those problems can show up in any economic system. Okay, so if Acts 2 isn't a political manifesto, then what is it? If it's not a blueprint for the state, what's the point? While the source argues that while it's not a model for government, it is a powerful model for the church and for believers. So what are we supposed to learn from it?
Here's the practical takeaway. First, the idea is that believers should take care of other believers. Charity begins at home, in the community of faith. And that leads to the second point. It's the church's job to care for its own members, not to just push that responsibility onto the state. Third, it's about building a community where people are so aware of each other's needs that nobody has to feel ashamed to ask for help. And that all leads to the final, most important goal, to act like a real family, where everyone makes sure that no one goes without what they genuinely need. It's a picture of radical, voluntary, and beautiful generosity.
So, in the end, the lesson from Acts 2 isn't about politics. It's about relationships. It's a snapshot of a community so radically changed by what they believed that they were willing to voluntarily sacrifice for one another. And that leaves us with a pretty challenging question for our own lives, doesn't it? In a world that often feels so divided and isolated, what does that kind of true community look like today?